Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Salford Minds podcast. This is a space for authentic storytelling, lived experience and honest conversations that connect us wherever we are on our mental health journey. This week is Mental Health Awareness Week, and this year's theme is Mental Health is Everywhere, Everything, Everyone. The purpose of this campaign, set by National Mind, is to show that mental health isn't something that's separate from our lives. It's connected to every part of it. It's in our relationships, our physical health, our finances. It's in our defining moments, and it's part of our day-to-day. Across this week, I'll be speaking to some of the incredible staff members here at Mind in Salford. They'll be sharing their own personal mental health journeys and how those experiences have shaped the way that they support others through their work. This Mental Health Awareness Week, we want to spread the message that mental health is part of everyone and that no one should have to face it alone. And now for my next guest, I'm joined by Stephen, who is our Therapeutic Services Manager for Rainbow Mind. Rainbow Mind is our LGBTQIA+ service here at Mind in Salford. This is delivered in partnership with Mind in the City, Hackney and Waltham Forest. Stephen plays a key role in ensuring that our clients are best matched with the right therapist for them, one that meets their unique needs. Beyond that, he's also deeply involved in building partnerships across Greater Manchester with other LGBTQIA+ services, all with the goal of increasing access and awareness of the support that we offer. What really drew Stephen to this role was his desire to bring his own lived experience into his work, so he could better support others who may be facing similar struggles. During the recruitment process, Stephen spoke really openly about his journey with addiction, something that really struck a chord with us. We felt that his honesty and insights were key to the compassionate, inclusive approach that we have here at Rainbow Mind. Hi Stephen, thanks so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just starting by telling us a bit about kind of that journey through addiction and how you've navigated those challenges as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's a hard question to answer in sort of a broad sense, but I mean, addiction was a part of my life from the get-go, really. I suppose I had my first drink when I was about 14, and right from the get-go, it was something that I just wanted to do more and more and more of. I had quite an unstable family upbringing. There was quite a lot of chaos, quite a lot of trauma in my childhood, and when I found first alcohol and later drugs, it just was this thing that really naturally felt like it bridged the gap between how I felt and how I wanted to feel. And it just became intoxicating. And when people talk about it as sort of like, oh, I had trouble at home, so I was going out getting drunk, it sounds more almost more thought out than it was. It wasn't like that. It was just like on any given day I could either be at home where there was maybe people shouting, quite a lot of chaos, or I could like be in the park with my friends with a bottle of something. So I was choosing that. And it just was this consistency theme throughout my teen years. I then sort of stumbled into drugs, and that just went on really right the way up until I was about 26, which is when I eventually stopped. Obviously, that's a very abridged version. It got like worse and worse as it was progressing, and the older I got, the sort of more intense and substantial the drug and alcohol problem was becoming.
Is it one of those things then, so like looking back, you can see how it kind of built up as like a difficult, detrimental kind of behaviour, but at the time you maybe weren't aware, so you used the word like unconscious there.
Yeah, I suppose as well, it like turned on me. So like there was a time where it was a legitimate coping mechanism. I'm not saying it was a good coping mechanism, but where it was working and it was giving me the things that I needed, and it wasn't having a overt impact on my mental health in a super negative way, i.e. it was sustainable. So a lot of it was like, especially my teenage years and like 18, 19, 20 when I was at uni, most of it, I'd say 90% of my drinking and using was still me having a good time. And then around the age of 22, 23, it was like it turned on me, and I hadn't seen that coming, and it suddenly became this really negative part of my life that I couldn't stop, and I could see that I needed alcohol, I needed drugs to feel okay. And that's where it kind of switched into this battle where it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I could see it was having a negative impact on my life, but in the short term it was giving me relief from feelings I just didn't know how to deal with. And again, yeah, like you said, like it's like easy to talk about in retrospect, but at the time it felt like everything else was the problem, and alcohol and drugs were like the glue that were holding me together. That's kind of how I perceived it, and it wasn't until I stopped and was able to get that distance that I could see how backwards I actually had it.
If you don't mind me asking, what kind of symptoms or feelings did you find that it enabled you to escape from, or how did that feel like such a contrast of a high in comparison to maybe the low that you were experiencing?
Yeah, I suppose there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know how to deal with, and again, like the benefit of hindsight. So like I now know that I had ADHD, which like had a huge impact on the way my dopamine was anyway. So it's quite, I think it's something like if you've got ADHD, you become about 40% more likely to experience addiction than if you've not got it. I might be murdering that statistic, it might be the other way around, but it increases your likelihood definitely. And then there was some unprocessed trauma. I just couldn't sit with it, so I felt so anxious when I wasn't drinking. That was the problem. It was less that I liked being drunk or I liked taking drugs. It was more that I felt so uncomfortable when I wasn't on those things. And when I say uncomfortable, what am I talking about? I suppose like, you know, anxiety to the point where it was borderline panic attacks a lot of the time. Not being able to just sit still, just constantly in my head of like, what's happening, and then the sort of shame of like whatever had happened the night before, thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? And that becoming so overwhelming that the only way I could quiet it and get rid of it was by having a drink again. And then you're just caught in that cycle. And by the end, it was just daily. Like every day I was drinking and taking drugs because it just, I had no other way of coping. It was just escalating and escalating.
Thanks so much for like being so open and sharing kind of that experience. Panic attacks are something that I know from like personal experience are super scary, and they feel like similar to a heart attack, don't they? What was your kind of first experience of having a panic attack, and how kind of have you learnt to manage those?
I mean, I don't know where the first one was, to be honest. I mean, I used to sort of have it happen at school when I was like 11 or 12. And I used to sort of get taken out of lessons to go to counselling and stuff. And it used to feel awful when that used to happen, like that I was the kid who was being taken out because I couldn't cope. They got, not worse, obviously they can worsen, can't they? But I remember one in particular when I was about 22, 23. I had this huge panic attack and I was in the middle of the street. And ended up in hospital because I just couldn't breathe. Like I said, it feels so physical, doesn't it? I just couldn't breathe. And I was like, it took me down. I was on the floor. People were gathering. It was horrendous, just an absolutely horrendous experience. And again, in the short term, like having a drink, I was like, oh, well, I deserve a drink. I've just had a panic attack. I could, do you know what I mean? The cognitive dissonance of like, this thing feels like in the short term it's making this better, but it was just kicking it further down the street and making it worse. And in terms of how they stop, I mean, I've not had a full panic attack for quite a long time. And it's really just learning how to cope with them. Like I said, I've been in counselling for a long time. Like breath work, I'm a huge advocate for, especially for anxiety, especially for panic attacks. Like it's about recognising the signs before they get to a point where you can't turn back from, or that's my experience anyway. And now I try to be really sort of aware of my body, aware of what's going on with my breath before it gets to a point where I've kind of crossed a line that I can't come back from on my own.
Yeah, it's that kind of prevention and I guess habit building that I hear about quite a lot for people, and being really in tune with your own personal physical experience and psychological experience to know when that is kind of escalating and getting to a point that you need to kind of bring it back down, and that thing of grounding that you said as well. So you mentioned briefly there that you've had therapy. Have you had any particular type of therapy? Has there been any tools and techniques from counselling that's been really impactful for your journey of addiction? And also you mentioned your struggles obviously with ADHD as well.
I think, like I said, so I started when I think I was 11 the first time I was sent to a counsellor. I don't remember an awful lot of that. It was just this sort of consistent thing where I'd go once a week. I think it was probably quite humanistic therapy, person-centered. It was a lot of play therapy, that kind of stuff was happening as well. For anxiety, like I did some CBT, and that was, in the short term, probably one of the most helpful experiences I had, was just getting some CBT wrapped around the actual anxiety, the actual panic attacks. And as a therapist, I'm sort of humanistic in base, but I think for things like anxiety, sometimes it is about just de-escalating the actual symptoms so you can get to the other stuff. Obviously at Rainbow Mind, we use compassion-focused therapy, and I think that's not a therapy I'd sort of received myself before I started working with it. But what was consistent in the therapy work I have done is about compassionate voices. And one thing I observed in myself was I had this very, very strong self-critic. I was so harsh with myself all the time. And being able to sort of quieten that voice and find a more compassionate way of managing myself and my emotions, I think for people with ADHD, for people with addiction, for people with anxiety, for people in general actually, it's so important that we're managing ourselves compassionately rather than critically.
Mm-hmm. So for people that don't know compassion-focused therapy, could you maybe give a bit of an example of how a practical example of, say, compassionate reframing might help to break that cycle and that kind of negative thought pattern that you mentioned there that was kind of your default, that was something that you found was kind of the baseline, if you like, and you had to kind of learn techniques to overcome that and rewire the way that you speak to yourself. So what is like a day-to-day example of kind of cognitive reframing? I
think compassionate reframing, I think a lot of it's about watching the tone which you're talking to yourself with, apart from anything else. Like sort of said, it's like, why am I like this? Why do I keep doing this? Even just softening that to a way that is more likely to get a response of like, well, hang on a minute, like why is this happening? Like, why am I responding this way? And just softening the tone, even if you're not even softening the word. The wording changes the way that feels. And I say to my clients a lot, like, if you came into therapy and you told me you've been struggling with anxiety, and I was sort of like, well, why are you doing that? Are you going to feel like I'm a good therapist? Are you going to feel like you're able to trust me? Are you going to feel like you're able to talk to me? And they always say no. But then at the same time, that's exactly how I talk to myself quite often. It's like, why have I done that? And sort of compassionate reframing in sort of other ways, it's like, we all make mistakes, and sort of softening that. And I can be so harsh with myself to the standards I hold myself to. Like if I'm running late for something, for example, or I've double booked myself, like my initial response is just like, oh, you're an idiot. Why have you done this? Why have you done this? And that's the obviously really harsh, critical version of it. And compassionate reframing is about catching it, watching how you're talking to yourself, and then thinking, like, why am I allowing that? Like, how would I say this to someone else that I cared about who was late or who had double booked themselves? I wouldn't be calling them an idiot. I'd say things like, well, you tried your best, but mistakes happen. Like, how can you solve the problem? I think sometimes people think being more compassionate with yourself kind of means you're giving yourself a free pass to behave however you want. And it's not about that, I still go to work, I still pay my tax, I still do all those things. I just try and treat myself nicer in terms of how I motivate myself to do those things.
It's super interesting, isn't it, how we kind of speak to ourselves in comparison to how we speak to other people. Like you've mentioned, you would never dream kind of speaking to a really good friend or a family member in the kind of critical monologue that you have in your head. So yeah, the super interesting techniques. And do you find as well that has an impact on kind of our nervous system? So I know that compassion-focused therapy has quite a lot to do with that threat response, doesn't it? And our soothing response, and how to kind of activate that more. So it has real physiological impacts if we change the way that we're talking to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. And I think a big part of compassion-focused therapy that I really enjoy is that focus on the nervous system. I think especially for neurodiverse people, that's great to get people grounded back in their body and understanding, sort of from a psychoeducation perspective, what this stuff is actually doing. I always use the example is if you had a child who was upset and you shouted at the child, what happens? Do they get less upset or more upset? Why do they get more upset? Because they're being put under pressure, they're being put under threat. And it's the exact same thing. Like, if I want to get the best out of myself, it's not going to happen if someone's screaming at me. When we're scared, we go into our limbic system, we make very black and white decisions, we think in very rigid ways because we've gone into survival mode. Why would I want to make my decisions from survival mode? I want to make my decisions from a place that's well reasoned, that's considering all the possible angles, and the best way to get me there is through compassion. Like there's a reason when we think about like schools and teachers, like when I think of a good teacher, I imagine a teacher who's very calm, very patient, very encouraging. Children learning to write, we don't scream at them until they know how to do it. We watch them make mistakes and we say, oh, that's very good, well done, well, let's try again this way. And I think that's how we need to be communicating with ourselves. It's not because it's woke or soft or whatever people might say, it's because that's what works. Like that's how people learn new skills. Compassion focused therapy is about creating the right conditions to take someone out of their threat system to be able to make decisions that actually work. And I think if shame worked for addiction, ADHD, anxiety, it would probably be gone, because people don't seem to have a problem with speaking harshly to themselves. It's for me, it's like it doesn't work, so let's do something new.
I love that. That's amazing. If you don't mind me asking as well, kind of, obviously I can tell how interested you are in the different kind of modes of therapy, and it's something that you've experienced from quite a young age, and it's clearly been really, really helpful for you. I know that you're a therapist as well, so how did you kind of find yourself in kind of that journey of this could be something that I would like to do and share with other people, and share kind of the tools that you've learned to benefit others and the way that they speak to themselves?
I think I feel very lucky to be in the position that I'm in today. At a time I had the worst mental health out of anybody that I knew. Like I really, really struggled. And I struggled from like I said, about 10 onwards. I just found the world very, very difficult. And, I don't say it glibly when I say like therapy, counselling, having access to those things, like saved my life. I don't believe I'd be here if I didn't have those things. I think the good thing about doing therapy from such a young age is when I did get to points in my life where I was in crisis, I knew what to do, and I didn't have that stigma there that often keeps people out of it, because I'd understood early on, when I feel really overwhelmed, I can go to a therapist and that will help me. And that kept me, there was a time in my life where having that sort of weekly touch point with someone was probably keeping me alive. It was the only stabilising influence in my life. Then when I got sober when I was 26 and I stopped drinking and I stopped taking drugs, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was so difficult. But once I'd got through the other side and started to see what recovery could look like and what my life could be, it became so important to me to sort of almost share the news with people who were like me, that look, there is a way through this actually. And you can get better. And I got sober through support groups, so I would go to these mutual aid groups, and a big part of those often is helping other people. So once you've got, say, a year or so, you'll help someone else who's new in. And I started doing that, and almost to my surprise, I found that I was very good at it, and that people trusted me, and that this stuff that I'd used to feel all this shame around, which was how poor my mental health had been. And I don't even like using that language around it anymore. Like, my mental health was what it was. Sort of how much I'd struggled, like those things were suddenly becoming strengths. And it was, there's a saying people use in therapy training a lot, or that was used when I was trained, is like, you can only take someone as far as you've been. And I think there's something beautiful about that because of the struggles I had, because of the pain I'd felt, when I meet other people in that place, I know how to respond to them. And I think people used to be quite scared of me when I was in addiction, when I was really struggling with mental health, because they didn't know how to reach me, they didn't know how to talk to me. It felt quite scary to them. And I just feel like no one ever really knew how to approach me or how to talk to me. And I think it's really beautiful because I've been there. Like, I know exactly how I needed to be approached, and I can do that for other people now. And yeah, that was the sort of motivator to training to become a therapist, and sort of, dedicating my life. That sounds quite like trite, doesn't it? But like, it's the most important. My mental health is the most important thing in my life fundamentally. When stuff starts to get in the way of that, I'm very, very strict about like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, I have to take good care of myself because I've seen where it can go. but also like what's more important than helping people find a way to live in a world that's really quite difficult. And Rainbow Mind, obviously it's catered towards the LGBTQIA plus community, and it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time to be a member of that community, and I think having spaces that are safe for people to feel accepted and be able to move through what's going on and get that support, like why, for me that just feels like, why wouldn't I want to do that? And it feels like it's not really an intellectual choice, it's where I feel drawn.
Mm-hmm. Wow, such a beautiful journey, literally in therapy to becoming a therapist to now managing a whole team of therapists for Rainbow Mind. And you can see kind of really clearly how that lived experience, as you said, you've been there, you understand, so you kind of want to pass on that wisdom. I think that's really amazing. So how are you kind of applying your experiences to your work currently as the Therapeutic Services Manager?
I think I say quite glibly, sometimes it sort of like takes one to know one, and I really enjoy that about it, of like, I understand how scary it can be approaching therapists for the first time. I understand how much of a journey it is, and I understand how uncomfortable a person can feel about exploring themselves. And I think obviously Mind in Salford specifically sort of does talk about the importance of lived experience, and I try to be I was very open about my experiences with addiction. I'm very open about my experiences with mental health, and I do that very intentionally because there is still stigma around these things, and I refuse today to play into it. I was a drug addict, and what? Like, I'm not anymore, and I don't think I deserve to be shamed for having an illness, which is what it was. And I think how that links into being a therapy service manager, it's like, I have a ability to put people at ease through being open and honest about my own vulnerabilities and own experiences. It's like it equalises things. And I think people with addiction, people within the queer community, people with all kinds of mental health struggles often feel very intense stigma, very intense shame. And I think just that sort of gentle nudge of like, oh, I have struggled as well, I have been in these places too, can cut through that sometimes quite quickly and quite comfortably. And I do think it's important, like why should we live with shame that other people have given us?
Yeah, it's completely normalising, isn't it, an experience that for the individual that's going through it feels very isolating a lot of the time, and you feel as though no one understands, and that it will never end, and kind of all those like really dark and quite scary thought patterns. So having somebody that's saying, look, I've been there, I'm sometimes still there, but that's okay, I'm still, I'm living a much happier, kind of healthier life. I think it's really inspiring, and that's why, as you've mentioned as well, kind of lived experience is one of like the core values at Mind in Salford for service development, for communications, for everything that we do right across the board. It really is at the centre. So I'd just like to finish by kind of asking if there is anything, kind of looking back on your journey, any kind of wisdom that you would share with somebody that's on a similar path.
I think I'd just want to say that, like, however dark it may feel, it's always reparable. There's always a way through. There's been times in my life where I felt like I couldn't go on, I didn't have enough strength, I didn't have enough hope, and it will and it can pass. And it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. But my life got better when I started talking about what was going on inside my head. That's when I started to improve. That's when I started to get well. And I found actually that once I learned how to talk about what was going on for me, people were more than happy to listen. And if people are struggling with their mental health, if people are feeling hopeless, if people are feeling like they're never going to get any better, it absolutely is possible. And if you can just find that one person who you feel comfortable enough to take that brave step of saying, like, look, I really need some help, that can be the beginning of something incredible. And I think I thought it was a personal failing that I wasn't able to handle life by myself. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is that I was never supposed to. Like, that was never the point. We're not supposed to be these islands. We're not supposed to be able to handle everything on our own all the time. We're supposed to need each other. We're supposed to lean on each other. And, you know, I was very grateful that when I didn't have any strength to carry on, there were people around me who put their arm around me and lent me some of theirs. And there'll always be people who are willing to do that. So yeah, if you're in a point where you feel like you need help, it doesn't have to be this huge, scary act. It's just saying, look, I would like some help, and there will always be someone who will come.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that this episode will kind of touch the hearts of a lot of people. So thank you for being super honest and open and sharing your experiences. It was amazing.
Oh, well, yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem at all.